Let us discuss how to build function components. To do the examples that we are going to discuss, we are going to need a React application that has been created using the create React app. And if you already have such an application, use that or run this command npx create React app followed by the name of the application. I am using app3 over here. Once this command finishes, cd into that React applications folder, and from within that folder type npm space start. So I have done that, and I'm going to type npm space start, and that will open up a new tab in your browser, and the URL will be localhost:3000. Next, open your React applications folder in Visual Studio Code. So open VS Code and click on open folder and open your newly created React applications folder. So I have now opened my app3 folder. I am going to close this welcome page. Now I'm going to expand this src folder over here, and I'm going to double click on app.js. Before I continue to the example code, I want to discuss one important point about this import statement over here and how it is different in React 16 versus React 17. In React 16, all components needed this particular import statement at the top. However, from React 17, this import statement is not needed when function components have only JSX. So if you look at the code in app.js that create React app gives us by default, you can see that this particular import statement is not there over there. You can see here that we do not have import React from React within single quotes. And this is because the React version I'm using is React 17.0.1. And in React 17, we do not need this import statement when the function components have only JSX. Just in case you encounter this error, React is not defined, go to the file that is listed in the error. In this case, it is app.js, and add this import statement. This difference between React 16 and React 17 is discussed in this blog post on reactjs.org titled Introducing the New JSX Transform. You can go through it if you are interested. We implemented this UI while discussing JSX. Let us implement it once again. Open app.js, and within the function app, remove everything in it. So I'm going to remove everything now. And like we did before, we need a header which is underlined, and we need two labels and two text boxes. So let's do that. We need to return JSX. So let's put in a return statement and open the brackets. So first we need a header. So let's use h2 for that. And let me type in please login. And then we need a label. The first label is username. Then we need an input text field, and let us give it an ID of username. Let's put a break tag in between, and let us create a label for password as well, and an input field for password as well. The type needs to be password, and we are getting these red squiggly lines, and the error is JSX expressions must have one parent element. So let's wrap all of this within a div element. So I have placed an opening div tag, and I'm going to place a closing div tag, and now we have wrapped everything within a div element which serves as the root tag. So let us take a look at the output, and as you can see, we have the header and the label and text box for username and password as well. However, we need to center everything, so let's do that. We have seen that within app.css there is a class called app which aligns everything to the center, so let's use that. So I'm going to specify class name equals app, and that should center everything now. As you can see, everything is centered now. Let us also add HTML for the labels. This is for username and also for password. And finally, we need to underline our heading. So we need to add some CSS to our h2 tag. Like we discussed previously, we need to specify an object for the style. So I'm going to open the curly braces to indicate that this is a JSX expression, and within that I will specify an object, and the key is text decoration. I'm going to use autocomplete, and I'm going to specify a string with the value underline, and that should underline a heading now. And as you can see, the heading is now underlined. So now we have re-implemented what we discussed previously while discussing JSX. We have re-implemented it because we are going to extend it shortly. But before that, let us quickly discuss how everything is working over here. Let us quickly discuss how the code that we are writing in app.js within this function app is ending up in the output over here. To understand that, go to the public folder over here and expand that, and within the public folder open index.html. So I'm going to double click on index.html, and this is the HTML file that we are seeing when we go to localhost :3000 over here. When we run npm start, what happens is Webpack, which is used by Create React App, it will take index.js and inject it into index.html. So just remember that index.js will be added to index.html during the build process. So when index.html is loaded, when we go to localhost :3000, what happens is the code within index.js also runs. And if you look at the code within index.js, we will find a react.render call, and there will be two parameters. The first parameter is app over here. Please ignore react.strict mode for now. React.strict mode is only there to do additional checks and give additional warnings to us. So please ignore that for now. So the first argument is this app component, and the second argument is an element with the ID root. If you go back to index.html, you can find a div tag with the ID root. So what we are doing is we are asking React to render this app component within this element with the ID root. You can observe over here that we are importing app component from the file app.js, which is in the same directory. And this is how code within app.js becomes part of the index.html, which is loaded when we go to localhost 3000. Let us quickly discuss this once again. When we go to localhost :3000, the file that is being loaded is public/index.html, and index.html will contain code that is in index.js because the build process will insert the code of index.js into index.html, and index.js has this react dom.render function call which takes the app component and renders it within the element with ID root. And element with ID root exists in the index.html to begin with. Let us open the browser developer tools and look at the elements. Here in the body there is a div tag with the ID root. Let's expand that, and as you can see there is a div tag with the class app, and this div tag is this div tag within app.js. If you look at the HTML within this div tag over here, you can find the h2 tag for the please login, and the label tag for the username, and the input tag for username, and then the break tag, and then the label and input tags for the password as well. So the react.render statement has taken the app component and has rendered it within the element with ID root. As you can see here, this is the div tag with ID root, and this is the div tag that corresponds to the app component. You can see that this div tag is a child of this div tag with the ID root. Now let us come back to our example code again within app.js. Since this was one of our first examples, we have put our example code directly within the app function, but in real React projects, we usually put this code in a separate component and then include that component within the app component. So let us do that. Let us create a components folder within the src folder. Click on the src folder and click on this icon over here for new folder. So I have clicked that, and I'm going to name my folder components. Now click on the components folder and click on this icon over here to add a new file. I am going to call this new file login.js. Observe the uppercase L over here, and login.js will be a function component. So it will be a function that returns some JSX. Let's move the code from the app component into the login component now. So I'm going to cut this code and paste it over here. Now login is a function component, so we can use it within app.js like this. We can write login and we can close the tags, and we have to return it. At this stage, if we go and see the output, we will get an error saying login is not defined. in app.js, and that is because we are trying to use login over here, but login is defined in login.js over here. So essentially we are trying to access the function login, which is in a different file, and in order to access functions in other files we have to use the import statement. But before we write our import statement in app.js, there should be an export statement in login.js. So let's write that: export default login. Now the login function is accessible from code outside login.js. So within app.js, now we can write our import statement as import login from, and we have to specify the relative path. If you observe, login.js is within the components directory. So we write our relative path as follows: dot to indicate the current directory, and if you type slash, VS Code will show us the contents of the current directory. We can see that there is a components folder over here. So select that, and if you type slash, VS Code will show the entries within the components directory, and there is only one entry, login.js. So if you click on tab, that should be selected and placed over here, and you can close the single quotes. So now we have imported the login component from the login.js file, which is within the components folder. Now if we go back to our output, we can see that the errors have gone away and we can see our output like before. Let us go to the browser developer tools. The HTML will look the same as before, but let us open our React developer tools, which is over here. If you look at the components, you can see that there is an app component, and within the app component there is a login component, which is exactly what we have here. We have the app component, and within that we have our login component. Please note that any components that we create, like login over here within the login.js file, have to have the first letter in uppercase. If you go to the docs in react.js.org, within the components and props section, the docs mention that always start component names with a capital letter. And this is because React treats components starting with the lowercase letters as DOM tags. For example, div represents an HTML div tag, but welcome with the uppercase W represents a component that we create. So always start the component names with a capital letter.